Well, hello everybody. Here I am on my trampoline at a stand-up desk, and we'll see how that works out. Hopefully it's not too much of an interference. We're working on the rays and the initiations webinar commentary. We're up to number 77, and in the last program, number 76, page 594, DK talked about the distinction between what is usually considered to be the Aryan race and what he calls the Aryan consciousness, which is the most important aspect of this idea of what the term Aryan means. I deal with the state of consciousness, which is the Aryan or mental consciousness or state of thinking. This finds its exponents and its, quote, race members, close quote, in every nation without any distinction or omissions. So it is divorced from the form, which usually is the way that the idea of the Atlantean race or the Lemurian race or the Aryan race is interpreted. So we can have people with forms which were characteristic more of the Atlantean race in the old days, or even of the Lemurian race, and they will be found with the Aryan consciousness. Also, the sixth root race characteristics are scattered throughout the world, and these are the ability to use the abstract mind and also the birthing of the true intuition. I'm reminding myself that abstract mind is called pure thought, and then we can apply that pure thought to the various concretions which the concrete mind produces. So this state of consciousness, the Aryan state of consciousness, it posits an ability to function with clarity upon the mental plane, to collate information, rightly to interpret and relate that information, and to create the needed thought forms or concepts for those interpretations. There's a lot of the planet Mercury in this type of consciousness. Mercury rules so many different levels of the mind: concrete mind, son of mind, abstract mind, transcendental mind. I'm rising as I go. And maybe it even has something to do with the mind which is the law, or which expresses the law on the atmic plane, but there Saturn is very powerful. Okay. So now with that little review, we can get into program number 77. You know, what does it take to study this material? Well, you know, there has to be the intuitive sense that the material is accurate, worthwhile, points to the future, and will help develop the higher faculties of the students of this material. It's not what the world seeks, the ordinary desire body of the ordinary individual, or as DK refers to it, the ordinary non-aspiring individual, does not point to in this direction. The desires are much more concrete and have to do with the fulfilling of the tendencies of the mental, emotional, and etheric physical elementals, and of the personality elemental, the composite elemental as a whole. The orientation is not towards the higher reaches of human nature, the higher aspects of the personal self, well, higher than the personal self, higher aspects of the self, which are not even suspected as existing. I know for myself, I get so deeply into this material that I forget that I'm living with assumptions and inner validations which have nothing to do with how people are really thinking. And that's why DK said it would be a long time before the individuals of today, the majority of them, would be ready for the path of occultism. If we are in this field of occultism, we've been there, we've had a lot of experience, some good, some bad, all good in a way. And we've suffered a lot, and our sense of values has been adjusted, and we have begun to look beyond the concrete formulations which exist in the three lower worlds. So, the door is not open for all simultaneously at all times. DK, in a comment on the old commentary, basically tells us we cannot hold the door ajar for another seeker, hoping that our holding will permit him to enter. He has to knock correctly. And that, of course, triple the call must be, and long it takes to sound it forth. Let the disciples sound the call across the desert, over all the seas, and through the fires which separate him from the veiled and hidden door. So when we put this information out, when we talk about it, when we try to perfect our understanding of it, we are working among ourselves and with those who, because of their long experience and many decisions and detachments, can begin to value the true nature of the material. So going on here, now we're talking about the ability to create thought forms. We've been talking about, I think, 15 different points concerning the nature of the fifth ray. Well worth reviewing, absolutely worth reviewing. But one can do that, and I myself will also have to review it until it becomes so much a part of my thinking as to be suggested automatically in the thought process without having to go dig into the books to remind myself. So that we begin to learn something by heart, and that becomes really important. So anyway, thought forms. We're functioning clearly with the Aryan consciousness on the mental plane. We are gathering information and collating it, getting it in order, and seeing its relations to each other. We're interpreting that information within a larger context, so we see what place the information holds. And then the fourth point here, to create needed thought forms or concepts for these interpretations. So these thought forms fall into three major fields of thought, or thought form areas of consciousness. Okay, and let's see how that, that's not what we want. Let's see how that works out. Science is the first word. Under this word, I include all that which the educational processes cover and are supposed to cover, and such a useful science as medicine. Well, in other words, this is not, strictly speaking, what we refer to as science in the narrow sense. I guess, right. It has to do with confirmed knowledge. And of course, we tend to look at this as a strictly fifth ray factor having to do with the dense physical form. There's so many people who, let's say in the medical field, they don't consider psychology really a science. They certainly don't consider philosophy a science. It's more on the third ray, but there has to be the power to observe, experiment, confirm, replicate, be certain of knowledge, ascertain knowledge and its replicability, so that it will appear the same to observers under the same observational conditions. There's a certain reliability related to the idea of science. All right, then the next one is philosophy with its presentation of great conditioning ideas. We might say pure thought presents pure thought from the abstract mind presents these Buddhic ideas. And then, there are different kinds of thought forms gathered under each of these headings. With philosophy, we cannot confirm what is thought so easily as we can with science, because philosophy generally deals with abstractions and not always with that which is verifiable by the senses. And then psychology, something in which Master DK seems to specialize, with its effort to account for humanity and to discover what man is essentially and how he functions. We might say this is the study of all self-conscious entities, their energy structure, and their consciousness. So yes, it is meant to account for what man essentially is and how he functions, but at the same time we can apply psychology to the solar angels, to the globe lords and chain lords and planetary logoi and solar logoi. They all have their more advanced form of psychology. They all have their ray structure, their astrological conditioning. We might say even the great lords of the constellations have a kind of astrological conditioning from a wider context. So when we know the way the energies which characterize any entity work together amongst themselves and work in relation to their environment, however small or large that might be, we know something about psychology. So, so far, what do we have is science, philosophy, and psychology. DK says, interestingly, you will note that I have not included religion in this analysis. The reason for this is that if the world religions were really controlled by concrete knowledge or science, they would not be the vague, speculative, mystical, and glamour-controlled systems which they are at present. Well, this is not a very sanguine view of the nature of the religious presentation at the present time. Glamour-controlled. Well, whenever you're focused on the personality, strictly speaking, as if it were your real identity, as so many religions are, what will be the fate of my soul? What will be my fate after I die, etc., etc. Then you have the possibility of distortion and glamour. It's only when we recognize ourselves as a soul and can function focused in the causal body as a soul and beyond that the usual glamours disappear. I would say by the fourth initiation, all glamours have disappeared. Interestingly, of course, there's the Buddhic connection in relation to the astral body where the glamours do appear. The fourth initiation releases us into the Buddhic field of experience, and the astral body becomes the organ of true love in the Buddhic sense. Someday the minds of men, illumined by the light of the soul, will formulate the one universal religion. You know, already HPB was looking forward to that, and the Tibetan certainly hints at that in terms of the New World religion, which will be scientific and philosophical and psychological. So the New World religion will be scientific, philosophical, and psychological. And we can already see that in Master DK's work. It is what we say about the inner worlds and the destiny of the human identity can be scientifically proved by those who can prove it. It embraces a great span, a great scope of understanding, and connects with deep principles to give us an idea of the larger context and how it works. And of course, it has everything to do with the energy, structure, and consciousness of those who are involved in practicing that New World religion. There are different approaches. We might say psycho-spiritual approaches for those who are on different rays and who are conditioned by different astrological signs. So the one universal religion sweeping over the entire globe, and who knows beyond that what the condition of the consciousness is in terms of connecting with the higher forces on other planets. It probably will be solar systemic at some point, but then the planets are differently arranged in terms of their achievements. So the humanity, let's say on Venus, is far, far in advance of the humanity on the Earth. So we need religions, philosophical, scientific, and psychological approaches appropriate to the degree of attainment of those who are on the different planets. And even on our own planet, these three approaches have to be suited to the attainment of the residents of this planet. Let's just say that the primitive religions of the ignorant groups are not going to be the same as the religion of a truly sixth root race individual. Then the kingdom of God will be known for what it is, another kingdom in nature, and we know that that is what we call the fifth kingdom of nature. Speculation, wishful thinking, and hopeful aspiration will disappear. You might say there will be factual confirmation of the esoteric truths. The science of occultism is the first step upon the way of true religion. And the scientific investigation of human psychology will greatly help towards this end. This is a very important statement. The science of occultism is the first step upon the way of true religion. Now, I think we can gather that when the Christ reappears, it is the true religion which will be practiced by those who can recognize him and follow him. And since it is the age of Aquarius, with its very prominent fifth ray, it will be a scientific religion having to do with the understanding of cycles and energy cycles and different kinds of energies, and when they can be invoked and when they are likely to be evoked. The whole science of invocation and evocation will be prominent, and we can say that the Antikarana will play an important part in the upper reaches of the New World religion. For many, it will simply be, and it is quite a sufficient thing, the contact of their soul and of the angel of the presence that will already signify an achievement. And when in some of the 12-step programs they talk about one's higher power, that is already in process. So the science of occultism is the first step on the way of true religion. You know, so often we have divorced the sixth ray from the fifth ray. Faith and knowledge have been divorced in the minds of people. Faith sometimes considered to be the higher thing, and knowledge very, very limited. But knowledge is not limited when we follow the path of occultism, so both together are needed. You know, the sixth ray has done a lot of dividing of one thing from another, fighting against the magical process, fighting against the scientific process, fighting against the inclusive and embracing second ray process. Maybe it's gotten along better with the first ray and the manipulative third ray and the artistic fourth ray, we might say. And we are going to deepen our investigation of human psychology, and books like Esoteric Psychology 1 and 2 will give needed hints for future researchers. So we're still on the fifth ray, right? Today we find this ray energy expressing itself mainly through science, a science sadly debased and corrupted by materialism and human greed, you know, technology to bring financial resources to some and to, in a way, take it away from others. But a science which, when animated entirely by goodwill, will lift humanity onto higher levels of consciousness, thus laying the foundation for the time when humanity on a large scale can pass through the transfiguration initiation. When is that? Is it in the age of Capricorn? Perhaps. During the age of Capricorn, I think that would be one we could use, age of Capricorn, and we'll call it age of Aquarius, age of Capricorn. There will be a greater number of applicants passing through the third degree, because Capricorn is the sign most associated with the third degree and cultivates those qualities which are needed for the transfiguration. So this is the way it is now. It's sadly debased by materialism. You know, we're beginning to investigate the inner worlds, the etheric worlds, at least that is starting. You know, the intended violence of man against man through the development of weapons systems is part of this materialism and greed and fear and desire for material self-preservation. But one day, goodwill will animate the scientific inquiry, and you know, many of those involved in science have come from other schemes where the second petal of the egoic lotus has not really been developed, but when it is developed, that love energy will enter more the hall of ignorance, hall of ignorance being simply that area of human pursuit which does not really count the subjective worlds as real. So there's ignorance of the subjective worlds, but there can be acute intelligence. It will lift humanity onto a higher level of consciousness and thus lay the foundation for the transfiguration. Not yet, but it's coming. So this is, let's see, what have I got there? Yeah, okay. BK talks about how important it will be for the fifth ray to join with the benevolence of the second ray and the, let's say, maybe the philanthropy of the third ray, you know, controlling the flow of energy, which can lead to creativity and the next step forward for many people. And so that will give, he tells us, the leisure for self-cultivation. And we all know, as students of spirituality, unless we have the time for self-cultivation, through meditation and study, we cannot progress. Well, so many people are still slaves to economic necessity, and this, the benevolent motivation behind the fifth ray, will relieve. Right now we have a lot of fancy inventions, and some of them are quite lethal. There's a whole group of people working on more and more refined and dangerous and subtle weapons, and psychism is being used to investigate the enemy and so forth. These kinds of uses of the fifth ray to gain knowledge, which will be used at the expense of others, has to cease, and the general goodwill has to spread all over the world, which is, of course, is not yet the case. Yet, steps in this direction are already being laid, and the existence of the press, the radio, and the rapid means of transportation, and even more rapid now, have done much to further the revelation of that unity and that oneness, which is the major characteristic of the universal mind. So the universal mind sees oneness, and the third ray, fifth ray, seventh ray have given us all of these systems of interconnection. Systems of interconnection reveal the oneness which is. So, and we might wonder, on the first ray, isolated unity comes in. It can be used on other rays, of course, but isolated unity comes in, and you isolate the one in the midst of the many. Well, the fifth ray, we have to remember, has a very close relation to the first ray, and eventually is absorbed into the first ray. Well, at least in terms of the human soul, it is. Fifth ray souls can transit onto the first ray soul. Fifth ray monads can end by accentuating higher first ray monadic possibilities. Okay, so this is the interconnection is greatly increasing at this time. And we have to really elevate the understanding of and application of the fifth ray, which is so materially focused at this time. But as the etheric possibilities become more and more accepted, the fifth ray will be used to investigate them. It already is in a way, although people, don't call it the ether per se. And some of the researchers like Leadbeater and Besant were using the fifth ray to investigate the higher and subtler worlds. It doesn't make any difference what context you may focus upon. The fifth ray can be used as an investigative approach, so as to understand the facts of whatever environment is of interest, whatever object is of interest. These developments can be regarded as the initial steps of the initiatory process for the third initiation, far ahead as that initiation may lie for the mass of men. The first step. So in other words, what can we say here? Every approach which tends towards the revelation of the factuality of oneness is a step towards the third initiation. It is unification and a growing sense of oneness which is required in order to take this initiation, and it is the integrated personality, as a whole, which takes it. So unification and a growing sense of oneness required to take the transfiguration initiation. The sons of men are one, and I am one with them, and there comes a time when you can, in the mode of harmlessness, look at all things. Harmlessness is the life expression of the man who realizes himself to be everywhere. What a statement. Everywhere. um, and see, how does it go further? Who lives consciously as a soul, and for whom all forms are alike, in that they veil and hide the light. All forms are alike in that they veil and hide the light and are but externalizations of the one infinite being. I left one sentence out. You'll have to look there, but I've always been arrested by the very first statement: harmlessness is the life expression of the man who realizes himself to be everywhere. Well, if you are everywhere, you are everything. And that unity, which we begin to sense, and must sense prior to the third degree, it begins to turn into oneness, and that oneness eventually turns into the isolated unity which characterizes the master, finally. So the integrated personality takes this initiation, the entire integrated personality, and let's just say to take this initiation, a very high level of integration must be achieved. Now he's going on, and he's speaking of things that were the case maybe 70 years ago. The major sin of Russia, and that which has prostituted and warped the initial divine impulse, as so often happens, underlying the ideology of that country, is the determination she demonstrates at this time to be separative and to shut the Russian people away from world contact. Is there a poet, is it Frost? Something there is that does not like a wall. I believe that's how it starts. And now, in this year, 2017, we already have in the United States that same kind of psychology protection through causing fragmentation through the erection of walls. And obviously, if that were the case in the human body, there would be sickness, and there's no reason to think that there will not be some form of social sickness arising from that kind of attitude of walling oneself off, supposedly for one's protection. Okay, so anyway, Russia at that time was doing that. It's not so much doing that now, and the Berlin Wall, has come down, and it was a great moment of victory for the human spirit. Let's see if we can sustain that realization amidst the temptations caused by fear at the present time. So shutting the people away from world contact, using the implements of deception, false news, false truth, and withholding of information. So naturally, of the four freedoms, freedom of speech is the first. And wherever there is a war against freedom of speech, we know that the lords of form are behind such an effort to crush free speech. It is not the totalitarian nature of the Russian government which is the prime disaster, although, let us say that DK said that totalitarianism is a big problem and must be defeated. Okay. PRBM. Let's see if that works. Okay. Let me put that in here. PRBM. And we'll call that problem. Helps later. So that's it is a big problem. And he said totalitarianism must be defeated. But in this particular case, It's not the prime disaster, maybe it's a more minor disaster. It is the refusal to develop the universal consciousness, but which will come under the Aquarian AQN, Aquarian soul of that nation. Okay, AQUARIAN, the Aquarian soul of that great nation. Will come under the Aquarian soul of Russia, and especially with the seventh ray, which leads towards a very practical type of synthesis, a synthesis in which all concrete perceptions are included and understood, but understood in unity and understood as really one thing. The only one thing, as it is referred to in the divine Pimander, and sometimes was that a Neoplatonic work? Was it an older work? Did it originate with Hermes Trismegistus? If it is, then Master R has a close relation to viewing the world in that way as the only one thing. All variety as the only one thing. Many governments today are totalitarian in nature, either openly or subtly. Everybody has to think the same, do the same, and there's not much room for diversity or variety. But at the same time, their peoples have free access to press and radio and are not kept in ignorance of world events. That's where the free press comes in. It's essential today when the press via the televised media is global in nature. Russia is drifting into a pronounced expression of the great heresy of separateness. Of course, I think this has ended with the death of Stalin, and even though the resuscitation of the freer spirit was not immediate, it did begin to occur, and there was the Glasnost movement, and Gorbachev, who was a great disciple, even though insufficiently appreciated by his own people, perhaps did bring Russia into a much more open state. Now, again, the cycle runs back and then maybe forward again. So there's always a couple of steps forward, one step back, and so forth. And now we have a more self-defensive system, a more nationalistic system. It all depends whether Russia plays to its Leo personality or to a more advanced and acceptable part of its Aquarian soul. So anyway, the great heresy of separateness, it is the one great heresy, says DK. It's the one method of conditioning thought which works against the divine plan and purpose. So there lies a problem which is refused recognition by her rulers. But of course, this was at the time Stalin and his group were ruling Russia, and there's always the tendency, when Leo is the personality sign, to seek dominance over other nations, and especially, the smaller nations around. And so the Soviet Union continued to expand in that way. Now there's been a breaking up of that union, and the soul nature of the various countries are free to emerge outside of a totalitarian system. So the existence of a closed mind on a national scale is dangerous in the extreme, just as the individual is in a dangerous state of mind when he closes it to world contact, world news, and world understanding, and when he refuses to admit new ideas and new modes of behavior. So the breath of life does not circulate. So, and this leads to various kinds of, let's call it, morbidity, which is the precursor of death and disintegration. So, and this is a a danger of the Leo energy to be totally self-absorbed, to find one's major interest focused on one's little personal self, magnifying its importance. We have some of this happening in the United States at the present time with an individual whose rising sign is most probably the last couple of degrees of Leo, and it's extremely short-sighted, extremely myopic, and in the field of consciousness, it renders the lower ego as the major object of interest and minimizes all other things. So there's no true proportion seen in the relationship between things. Fortunately, the influence of this fifth ray energy, which is always present, whether the ray is in incarnation or not, is steadily leading humanity towards illumination. So always present, maybe through the fifth ray personality of humanity, and we might say through the fifth root race, which we are still experiencing. And there may be other ways in which it is present. It will be present through various constellations and their emanations, present through various constellations. I think we always have all the rays to deal with, and there's never a time when we are deprived of any ray entirely. It would be like being deprived of a chakra, and even when a chakra is not developed, at least it's there as a presence, however slowly it may be pulsating, at least it's alive. If we eliminate a chakra, we bring on death in some form. And I think if we eliminated a ray, or eliminated any one of the planetary influences or any one of the zodiacal influences, we could not have a complete system. And in the little microcosmic year, we are, for instance, exposed to all the energies of every sign of the zodiac with all of its rays. For however short a time, they are always all present. But during a particular ray cycle, they are dominant and factors which are persistent and must be dealt with. So let's even think about today that the existence of a closed mind on a national scale is dangerous in the extreme. And I think we witnessed this with Germany, the tremendous isolation. And again, the leader there had the sign Leo, prominent and elevated, Saturn in Leo. And as DK said, that Leo, he didn't know the personal horoscope, but it was prominent spiritually or subtly for Hitler. This ray energy, the fifth again, operates always in connection with the law of cleavages. Always in connection with the law of cleavages. So it's going to cause splits, but sometimes, that is necessary in order to discriminate one thing from another, to understand one thing and not confuse it with another. Today, tremendous cleavages between the past and the present are in order. He told us that we couldn't go on with the situation as it was in the before the First World War. There would have been no progress. The cleansing of that war was very necessary to divide us from the bad old ways and the very material orientation of human consciousness. So today, tremendous cleavages between the past and the present are in order. The importance of this statement is to be found in the fact that for the first time in human history, humanity is aware of cleavage at the time it is being brought about. Okay. So, our consciousness is more present and understanding within the present. Hitherto, cleavages have been noted during an historical retrospect. In the alchemical process, alchemical process, there must be cleavage, just as in the chemical process. We cannot mix all things together simultaneously. And synthesis is not necessarily mixture. And I think we have to understand that. The apparent differentiation between perceptions remains, but the underlying sameness of being is perceived. So today all men everywhere are conscious of the fact that the old order, the old cultures and civilizations are rapidly passing away, and they are universally clamoring for the new. Some, let's just say, some do seek to retain the old. DK said after the war, some people were seeking to rebuild all the old buildings just the way they had been. They did not want to advance into the future possibilities, which were evident because of the destruction of the old during the war. And we cannot allow ourselves to go back to the bad old ways, nor can any human being who is advancing on the spiritual path allow himself to go back to his own personal, individual, bad old ways. But still, under the fourth ray, there are old values, which are in a way universal values, permanent values, ancient landmarks, which do have to be preserved. So we cannot throw the baby out with the bath water, as it is said, which is possibly a tendency in some applications of the Aquarian mentality. Everything new, throw out everything old, even though it is well established as necessary for the preservation and development of the human race. Everywhere men are laying the foundation for the new order, the coming of which is threatened only by one country, Russia, owing to its separativeness, and not because of its ideology, and by one world group in every country, those guilty of financial greed and consequent aggressiveness. Now there you have, in a way, a very bad combination of a lower response to Saturn and Mars. Saturn and Mars in lower response. Acquisition for the sake of safety and gratification, and then the aggressiveness either to protect that acquisition or to take from others what one thinks one needs. It's a very selfish approach, and it creates a situation of discontent and dissonance and everywhere friction, which does not lead to harmony. So Russia is part of it, or was part of it. Now I think he said some things about the United States too, and how there is a danger for world peace posed by the United States. He's also talked about the fascist tendencies of the United States, and we see some of that playing out before our eyes. So no country is perfect. There are high ideals for many countries, and they are needed by humanity, but there's also a shadow side to every worthy nation. And there must be the national psychology to see the shadow side. And that, takes a little bit of humbling. Some people don't like to look at themselves in that way. Some nations don't want to look at themselves in that way. But one must know one's own shadow, otherwise the shadow will control. I feel like I'm part of the old radio program, only the shadow knows. Anyway, financial greed and consequent aggressiveness, and we really do see that emerging in various powerful countries, and how this particular group mentioned here really fights against the true progress and welfare of the average people in any country. They seek power for themselves, financial power and military power, and really are in a position to stop the progress of the other more normal people. Before humanity can pass through the transfiguration initiation, the new world order must be functioning and the coming civilization must be at its height. Well, okay. How long will this take? How long before the coming civilization is at its height? Is this an Aryan process, or do we have to wait until the sixth root race? Okay, it is useless for me to consider with you this third initiation in connection with humanity as a whole, or its preparatory or subsequent initiatory process, but at least the perception of world interconnectedness is leading all towards it. All this lies too far ahead for even advanced humanity to consider. So it does sound like it's not any kind of process which can occur in the next 2,000 years. It sounds it's more a process which will occur in the sixth root race. 6 and 3 are related numbers, but then so are 5 and 3. There are, however, senior disciples who are preparing for this initiation. And he calls them senior, interestingly. So if one is a disciple and is preparing for the third initiation, then one is a senior disciple. Of course, it's a relative term, and it depends on the context. Just as there are a few who are passing through the initiatory process prior to taking the fourth initiation, not great numbers. The bell-shaped curve isn't there yet, so only a few. And maybe, sometimes we can look out on the world stage and we can see great humanitarians and those who have really made a difference in their country and in the world. And we can say, well, okay, they are preparing for the fourth initiation. The outstanding expression of the fifth ray energy can be seen in the rapid formulating of the many ideologies which have taken place since the year 1900. Well, this is the ray of definition. And ideologies crystallize under the influence of the fifth ray. And they become articulated and made definite and justified, rationalized, and so forth. In other words, not vague idealism, but concretized idealism in the many emerging ideologies. Some of them good and progressive, and some very bad and retrogressive. Such words as fascism, communism, National Socialism, socialism as the British accept it, and the names of many schools of psychology and philosophy were unknown 100 years ago. So giving a concrete distinction to many ideological approaches. Today, they are the common talk and phrases of even the man in the street. The inflow of the mental energy into the world of men, fifth ray, the attainment in consciousness of mental ability by many thousands, that's our educational system, and the achievement of mental polarization by aspirants all over, all the world over. And by this, he means mental polarization in a non-technical sense, as it is really defined as occurring between the second and third initiation, somewhat midway, but at least a strong mental focus and orientation are all due to the activity of this fifth ray energy. All due. It's allow us to define our approaches and to discriminate under the fifth ray, under the fifth ray, we discriminate one approach to the ideal from another. And of course, then we have the war of ideologies caused by cleavage between them. And we don't have the reconciling fourth ray or second ray at work. So this may be regarded, all this, or the emergence of distinct and well-defined ideologies may be regarded as preparatory work for the first and second initiations. The emergence of distinct ideologies which people follow and are willing to sacrifice for. Okay, ideologies, I-D-E-O-L. All right. Some of this success is due to the little realized function of the fifth ray energy, that of telepathic interplay. This is interesting. So the Aryan Center is involved a lot in telepathic interplay, and we know that under Venus, the sole distributor of the fifth ray, the Aryan Center is ruled by the fifth ray because Venus is the planet assigned to its activity and activation. So telepathy is involved here in the spread of ideologies and also maybe in the adherence to one or another. Of course, one day we need a very broad point of view which allows us to understand the place of every ideology within the larger whole. Few people realize, says the Tibetan, in the slightest degree, how naturally telepathic every human being is, or how impressionable are their minds. This is, again, an effect of fifth ray influence. So it's very interesting, let's just say the ray, which is responsible for the law of cleavage, is also responsible for the bridging of cleavages through telepathy. And of course Aquarius is another one of those signs of the zodiac which rules circulation, not only the circulation of the blood and the nerve fluids, but the circulation of thought. It is predominantly at this time a fifth ray sign, and it's emerging into the greatest of the fifth ray signs at this time. It's going to supersede Leo as the fifth ray sign. And we can just see that the spread of thought from one place to another is being objectified in our media, but it also occurs on the subtle levels. So there's a telepathy that involves knowledge. There's all kinds of telepathy. There's a kind of a transmission of whatever type of energy we may be dealing with. There's emotional telepathy, there's mental or knowledge telepathy, there's soul telepathy, and maybe to an extent will telepathy and love telepathy and spirit telepathy. The transmission of one type of perception from one apparent place to another apparent place. So that is a very unifying factor. Remember also Mercury and Uranus are involved in this telepathic transmission. And on a very high level, Mercury carries the fifth ray in my estimation. And Uranus has a strong fifth ray component, maybe in its mind, the mind of that planetary logos, mind or personality. I suspect it's the mind with its seventh ray soul and first ray monad and possibly third ray personality. It's a very hard line ray and yet somehow involved in that line of energy from Sirius, which transmits heart realization. So there's a mystery for us. So we are naturally telepathic, and this will only increase during the age of Aquarius. So this will only increase during the fifth ray age of Aquarius. Let's call it the age of circulation. Of various energies through various media. And of course, the etheric circulation is the most important. But by that, I don't only mean the etheric circulation through our normal systemic etheric body, which is part of the lowest systemic plane, but the kind of circulation which occurs cosmic etherically on the highest planes towards which we aspire, the spiritual planes, namely the Buddhic, Atmic, Monadic, and Logoic. Those are cosmic etheric planes, and there must be a tremendous kind of unitive, unifying, oneness-making circulation on those planes. Okay, friends, I think this takes us to the end of Rays and Initiation Webinar Commentary number 77. And the date is the 26th of February. And where did we begin? Well, where are we? We're on page 597. And I think we began on 594 is my guess. I always end up having to do this. Well, not always. Sometimes I actually fix in my mind. Okay. So from 594 to 597, yes, and then we'll go on to number 78. Well, you know, this is very thought-provoking material. It needs a lot of pondering. It needs a lot of discussion, I would say, among people who are willing to be careful in their thought and intelligent in their pursuit. And then the value of it will really come home. So all of this, so much of this we have to look forward to in the coming new age. If we can just get through this rather last-ditch fight, or fight to the last ditch of these forces of materialism which want to guard inferior perceptions as if they were reality. And materialism is really a condition of consciousness brought about by false perception, ignorant perception of this aggregation or congestion of matter we call the dense physical plane, as if it were the only reality, when we can refine our perceptions and unveil new areas of energy, then materialism will disappear. And sometimes I think it will be our scientific instrumentation which will lift the veil. DK has told us that materialism is already dead, and basically the coming of atomic energy and even the release of the atomic bomb has killed materialism. Now it's just a question of watching the products of materialism fall apart, disintegrate, and give way to the newer, more unitive perceptions. Okay, if I'm doing a little bit of bouncing up and down, I hope that doesn't make you dizzy. I'm just trying to keep everything circulating here. Okay, so that's the end there, and we will go to the beginning. of Raised and Initiation Webinar Commentary number 78, and we'll start on page 597 before long. Okay, thank you very much for being present, and there are many things for us to ponder on, to brood over with great concentration and excluding interruption until the light, increasing light, breaks forth. See you soon, and bye-bye.